Was that I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day? Was that I Heard the Bells on Christmas? That's a whole melody I didn't know for that song. So there's often things we don't know about our Christmas tradition. So that was a different melody than I knew. So well, let's look at the lyrics for that for a minute, because I don't think the congregation got to see them. Did you all know another melody for that as well? Okay, all right, it wasn't just me. That was great, though. That's one of the things we're doing this morning, is we're mining some of the history that we don't always know. But I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat, a peace on earth to all goodwill. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song, a peace on earth to all goodwill. And then the final verses. Then peal the bells more loud and deep. Hope is not dead, nor doth hope sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth to all goodwill. Till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from day to day, a voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth to all goodwill. So thank you for introducing me to a new melody for that this morning. But I wanted us to know those lyrics and keep those in our minds as I'm preaching this morning, because we will come back to that in just a moment. But I want to talk about a year. I want to talk about a year that is marked by grave injustice. A year where things like racism, sexism, ableism, still all around. I want to talk about a year where the dominant narrative, religious narrative, is one that is exclusionary. It's a religious narrative that only invites some people to the table. I want to talk about a year where the social discourse and what passes as the news lacks integrity and truthfulness. I want to talk about a year where there are concerns about the state of intellectualism, education. I want to talk about a year where there's a huge disparity between the rich and the poor, and there is a fear of an oligarchy taking hold, the richest taking power. And finally, I want to talk about a year where there is a brash, controversial, divisive president. I want to talk about 1835. Because we have been here before. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So that president was President Andrew Jackson at that time, and everything that you heard that I was saying there this morning is all from that time, but also, as you very savvily put together, could also apply to this moment in time as well. All these things in 1835 were happening at Christmas time, as some Unitarians and Universalists sat in some sanctuary somewhere and pondered the weight of the world. But guess what? They had 1836 ahead of them. We have 2026 ahead of us. And even though that was almost 200, 190 years ago, now there is a thread that we can follow to see, well, how we got here, and in knowing how we got here, who we are and who we have been, and how we can ground ourselves in that knowledge to face this coming year, which is not 1836, but 2026. So who we are? Well, as Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarian Universalists, we can trace our lineage all the way back to those Pilgrims and Puritans in New England, at least trace our history in this country. We can go further back if we want to get into our European roots, but that gets really complicated, to say the least. So those Pilgrims and Puritans came here to the United States, and did they celebrate Christmas with joy and enthusiasm? No. No, they were leaving behind traditions of Christmas that were based in pagan holidays that were about drinking and carousing and having a really good time. And our Pilgrim ancestors were not into having a really good time. Anything but. So Christmas was a very severe occasion marked by acknowledgement and absolutely no celebration, no twinkling lights, none of that. That's the foundation for our country. So when you hear people out in the world saying Christmas should be celebrated and understood in one particular way, just know that we're part of how it was started in our country, and it wasn't that way at all. It was a minor holiday, a day or an occasion to mark religiously, but not a day to make a great big deal out of. So that continued in American history, where Christmas was not such a big holiday to celebrate. It was an occasion to mark. And as we move into this time period I'm talking about, where all these social issues were at work, we come into an era where Unitarianism was really beginning to thrive. And we had movers and shakers in the Unitarian world and the Universalist world as well. But mostly, we're going to be talking about the Unitarian historical thread for Christmas. But by the time we get to, about 1832, we have a woman named Harriet Martineau. Now, Harriet Martineau is a devout Unitarian, and she is a woman's rights advocate, and she is a journalist, she's a writer, she's this amazing powerhouse of a human being. And Harriet Martineau has an assignment. She's going to go talk to another Unitarian, a man named Charles Follin. Now, Charles comes from Germany, and Charles has been an anti-slavery speaker for a long time, to the point that he basically finally couldn't find a country in Europe that would keep him, and so he came over here to the United States to share his perspectives. He learned English and ended up with the job as the ethics professor at Harvard University, and then became the professor of German literature, I believe. Well, he continued to speak out. And his speaking out against slavery was considered very controversial, even at Harvard. And eventually, I think it was around 1837, something like that, he was let go from Harvard because they just didn't want to hear any more about this. But right in the middle of his tenure at Harvard, Harriet Martineau gets this assignment that she's going to go talk to the great Charles Follin in his house with his family. She's going to talk to him about slavery, about the abolitionist movement. So she's really excited. She's ready to write this article. She shows up at the house. She walks in, and what does she see? There in the parlor is something she's never seen before. Now remember, you have to really put yourself in the mindset. We're looking at 2 Christmas trees today. She had never seen one before. So she walks into his house, and there in the parlor is this gigantic tree that's been cut from the forest, covered in candles and tinsel and decorations the kids have made. The kids are running around the tree, playing with things. There's presents underneath the tree, and she is just overwhelmed by this beautiful, joyous, glowing sight that she's never seen before. So she writes this article for a ladies' magazine, and she talks about the social justice work that Charles Follin is doing, the anti-slavery work, but she also talks about this beautiful tree, this welcoming tree that brought her into this home. And that was one of the first Christmas trees in the United States. This was a tradition Charles had brought with him from Germany that really got popularized, and people started noticing this article and talking about it. There were a couple other things around the same time as well, but all of a sudden, people wanted Christmas trees in their homes. And I love the fact that that original association of a Christmas tree in the United States is related to the social justice work of these Unitarians at that time. So, we can claim the Christmas tree. Maybe not wholly, of course, but this is ours too. And people like Harriet Martineau, as I said, were Unitarians. Their belief in Jesus and the nativity story was often mostly based in the idea of Jesus as a moral teacher. So there is one exception to that I'll be talking about today, but for most of these folks, their understanding of Jesus, their understanding of this story was not a supernatural story. For the most part, it was a story of a great teacher, a Jewish teacher, being born into the world and teaching a message of love and compassion that just hadn't been heard before. So they were starting to put these things together as they're thinking about things like Christmas and the Christmas tree. Again, we take all this for granted, that Christmas is about goodwill and cheer. No, Christmas was about carousing and having a party, and then Christmas was about absolutely not carousing and not having a party. And then this is the new emergence of Christmas as an opportunity to think about compassion and good cheer, connecting that Christmas tree with the idea of joyful generosity of spirit. So what happens next? What happens next? Well, we go forward a few years, we go across the ocean, and there is a man, a writer. And this writer's last novel has flopped. Not only has it flopped, but he's building a new house. He's got a wife and kids. He's trying to decorate this house. His finances are in shambles. He's trying to deal with his father's debts, and it's all a mess. And he's walking down the London streets one day, and he sees yet more children who are starving in the streets. And he thinks, what can I write? What can I write to help the plight of these poor children? Now, he raised in the Anglican Church, but he's been attending a Unitarian chapel, and he's got a pew there. This is in the days when you purchased your pew. Can you imagine? You purchased your seat. So the wealthier you were, the closer you were to the front. Though I know some of you like to sit in the back, so it might not... You would have done really well in that time. It would have been a bargain for you. But he's purchased a pew at this Unitarian chapel, and so he's been hearing this message of social justice, of what it means to make this gap between the rich and the poor grow smaller. And he thinks, what can I do? And he thinks, okay, I can write something. And Christmas is coming up, and maybe I can connect that to what's happening with these kids. So he goes to his publisher and he says, look, I've got this idea. I want to write a book about Christmas, and I want to highlight the plight of the poor, and I want to offer something for the rich so that they'll have a conscience, especially at this time of year. And the publisher looks at him and says, sorry. You've made a lot of money for us, but yeah, that's not going to work. So he goes home and he says, you know what, I actually really believe in this idea. I believe it to the degree that I am going to self-publish, that's not the term then, but that's what he did, self-publish this book. And that's what he did. He wrote the book, he printed it, published it, got it into the bookstores, and yes, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol became a classic. It became a classic almost instantly, but because it connected all the dots that people had been starting to connect between Christmas and compassion and goodwill. And its influence in our culture really can't be overstated. It started to continue that change that Christmas had been shifting toward. And it was no longer such a minor holiday. It started to become something in people's minds where they were annually engaging with the idea of what it means to be truly compassionate and just in our world today. By 1849, you have somebody like Edmund Sears. This is a Unitarian minister. He's having personal issues. He's at a low point. The Mexican-American War is going on. He's feeling depressed about it. And so he writes this hymn, It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. It's a hymn that doesn't mention Jesus or the birth, but instead is focused on this idea of peace on earth and goodwill to all. 1863, We have another Unitarian, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the author of our song, which I discovered has two distinct melodies to it. And you heard in those lyrics, it's not about the traditional Christmas story, is it? It's about that idea of goodwill to all. We get into 1868. We have a young woman. She's not a successful writer at this point. She's written some pulpy stories and so on. Her father is an esteemed Unitarian minister, esteemed and controversial Unitarian minister. He had some odd moments there. Started a commune that wasn't very successful. But she's thinking about what she can write. She wants to write something that incorporates all the values of her Unitarian upbringing. She wants something that reflects the love of her family. Something that really captures the spirit of New England and the care and compassion neighbors show neighbors. So she sits down at her desk, and I've actually stood in the room and touched that desk, and she wrote a book called Little Women. And in that book, the March sisters get up on Christmas morning. This morning they have looked forward to so much for a Christmas breakfast that they're just waiting for, where every detail has been thought out. And they hear about a family who is in worse shape than they are. And they give their Christmas breakfast to that family. All of these works added to the cultural understanding of what Christmas is. And if I could summarize it in one sentence, I'd say that what these authors and songwriters and culture makers were saying was that we can be the Christmas miracle. You don't need to look any farther than your neighbor and yourself. We can be the Christmas miracle. And I think it's true as we're approaching yet another Christmas, because they do roll around every year, don't they? They roll around every year, and this year we know that it is a time when we can help to offer the shelter that is needed for people who are struggling to find it, especially immigrants. Again, echoes of that ancient story. We can be the people who resist when a tyrannical king, whether he's named Herod or not, is putting his name where it doesn't belong. And we can continue to offer, through the community and care, the circle that we create, a sense of hope that there is something worth bringing into our world, something that we are still able to create and provide and give in this oh so complicated world. And so the good news this morning is that 1835 did happen. And that means that how we respond to these conditions is somewhere in our DNA. We know how to do this. We have a roadmap that's been created by the folks who came before us. We're here in this moment, and this moment seems overwhelming and everything, but the reality is it is a moment in time, and it will pass. But how it passes is determined by us. We get to choose. We get to choose how we make a difference. But most of all, on this day, I want to say that we get to choose Christmas.